the countries in the Middle East are highly vulnerable for climate change, with rising sea levels, with water scarcity, land degradation, high import of food from other regions. Now, with the COP27 here and the COP28 in the UAE, climate action has gained momentum in the region, and with a specific focus on sustainability and climate finance. We notice this at the government level, but it as well opens new opportunities for financial institutions that support communities and businesses in the shift to climate-resilient economic systems. In today's panel, we will explore how the public and private sector can maintain this momentum post-COVID and maintain social and environment considerations in the financial and economic sector. I'm joined here on stage with 4 experts with a variety of experience. We have on my extreme right, we have from the banking sector, Amin Belhaj Soulami, who is the CEO for Middle East and Africa of BNP Paribas. We have from the manufacture sector, Ivan Yanelli, who is a senior consultant on sustainability at the Emirates Global Aluminium. Then we have from the UN, Raidan Al-Shaaf, who is the resident economist at the United Nations office in Abu Dhabi. And finally, but not least, we have Mustafa Bayoumi, my colleague at the Anwar Gargash Diplomatic Academy, who is there a research fellow. As we're already a little bit behind, I immediately want to jump into the discussion. Let me start with you. Let's start where the money is. So let me start with the banking sector. How does BNP Paribas engage in climate finance? And as well, how do you contribute as an organization to climate action in general?
Sure. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I can hear you. Yeah.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. This is a very important event for BNP Paribas. We have been engaged in sustainable finance for quite some time, but also we've been present in the region for over 50 years in the Middle East and Africa. So this is one of the driving forces. Climate finance is one of the driving forces of our strategy and what we offer to our clients. And we do it, there are several aspects to it. We have obviously financial tools that we deploy. You know, it ranges from the simple loans, structured or not, to the distribution, origination of bonds, to sustainable linked loans. So there is a number of instruments that we deploy, and on which we have acquired quite a leadership, being one of the early adopters of this vision. In the region, we have participated to important projects like Al Dhafra solar plants that we participated to the financing, but with many clients in the region. But on top of that, what's very important for us is to raise the awareness of these topics. It's a relatively new topic that has emerged, I would say, in the last 5-6 years, but with extremely strong acceleration. And we are very happy to see how the leadership of the countries in the region has also put that at the top of their agenda, and is putting in place all the frameworks around this ambition.
Thank you. Let's move to the manufacture sector. Ivano, the European Union recently introduced the carbon border adjustment mechanism with the European Green Deal. It's going to start in 2026 onwards. Now, other countries are doing the same. Other countries are also looking in like how we can apply fees on importing goods on their emission content, and in this way penalize those producers with a more carbon-intensive production process. And this would, of course, give a competitive edge to your domestic firms with fewer embodied emissions. Now, how can we use this mechanism as an investment tool? And could you be specifically like what this means for the Middle East?
Absolutely. But before I start, I just wanted to say, actually, my first carbon project was with you guys. In 2010, you had established the first carbon facility with UNDP, and allowed for a quick uptake in the good old CDM days. So thank you for that.
And it was in my previous capacity. I was running that business. from
Oh,
London.
fantastic. You see, I didn't know, but our paths have met again. From a CBAM standpoint, and again, apologies for that, just we're amongst friends and colleagues at the end of the day. In terms of CBAM, it's not only the border adjustment mechanism that creates opportunities. I mean, probably the talk of the town now, it's the Inflation Reduction Act, which enables, from a legislative standpoint, companies to set up green businesses utilizing incentives and other elements. From a CBAM point of view, it's even better, because all of the sudden we have this cascading effect. CBAM does not start in 2026, it starts 2023. Even though I do not have to pay for the compliances, I do have to start the reporting regime, which is complex per se, but allows organizations to look at the value chain of carbon emission differently. So let me give you some numbers so you just understand the scale. AGDA is the world's largest manufacturer of aluminum, premium aluminum, and exports about 2.7 million tons of aluminum per year. So given that roughly one ton of aluminum has about 7 tons of CO2 embedded, this creates quite an economic uptake. Now, if I just look at it, I can just take a check, sign it, hand it over to the EU. Well, I'm Italian, so I'm sure some of it will trickle down to my country. Or I could actually do something slightly more interesting, which take the NPV value of all these checks and start investing from today in decarbonization of hard-to-abate manufacturing. And this is essentially what's happening. So we're looking exactly at what technologies can be matured by taking a longer-term view, and this is where the Middle East shines. I mean, unfortunately, in my country, the political cycle is not always as long as those in the Middle East. In the Middle East, there is ambition, there is long-term view, there is a very dynamic, baggage-less uptake of new technologies, new trends, and it allows to mature technologies and opportunities that would have otherwise been difficult to see in place.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Ivano. Let's move now to a governance perspective. So, Redan, from a UN perspective, so policymakers always have limited resources which can be dedicated to many sustainable development needs. So, how does the UN deals with this specifically? And then one more question to follow up on that one is the UN is also a strong advocate of an integrated national financial framework. So could you tell us also a bit more about this framework and how it works in practice?
Fantastic. Thank you, Seb, for that question. And I suppose welcome everybody to COP, the Conference of the Parties. This is a United Nations engagement, and it's designed to mobilize the international community to work on the climate action. And as we do so, one of the key primary policymakers' dilemma is that who's going to pay for all of this? So I have a couple of slides for you. The first one shows you when we talk about the 100 billion target, annual target. Where is that money going to come from? Where is it coming from now? And we're tracking it. We see that we have a significant contribution coming from bilaterals, from multilaterals, including international development banks, the UN funds, and other mechanisms. But also we have a contribution from the private sector. And unfortunately, that contribution from the private sector has been stagnating. It hasn't been growing, around 14 billion or so every year. And we're looking to address that in somewhat. And if we can move to the next slide as well, I can share with you that when we look at the funding that comes to the United Nations system and how we spend it, since we have development programming in 130 plus countries around the world, we see that only 2 countries from our development partners have some specific funding earmarked to address the climate crisis, to address mitigation, but more importantly, to address adaptation. Because the economic argument for adaptation requires some donor and concessional financing. And within that context, when we look at different areas, we see a trend that as a result of COPs, as a result of our engagement here, we see more and more bilateral countries investing more to allocate more earmarked funding towards sustainable development, particularly climate-related funds. But the problem is that that remains a small part of it. And if you look at the total funding and which SDGs are benefiting from this kind of funding, we see that a big chunk of the funding that comes to address the development challenges are directed towards humanitarian and peace and security. And the funding related to the climate, related to SDGs 13, 14, 15, is quite minuscule. And that's a problem because that means tomorrow's challenges induced by natural disasters and other related issues will not have the funding required to prepare for that kind of realities and to look at that mitigation. And one key slide just to share with you is the region, our region here. Our funding portfolio to respond to humanitarian and developmental challenges in the region has increased 5-fold in the last 10 years. The total envelope we received under this area went from $20 billion to $40 billion, and the part that goes to this region is quite profound. Shows you the gravity of the challenges in the region. And just to share with you where you can find more numbers around this financing UN.report. And the key point that I'm trying to say here is that you're a policymaker and you find a limited fiscal resources and limited access to multilateral development banks, concessional financing, bilaterals. So where do you spend that money? That's the dilemma. Do you put it in health? Do you put it in education? Do you put it to invest in keeping alive your marshlands, your mangroves, building new barriers for rising sea levels? What is the situation that's happening here in Egypt, for instance, in Alexandria and the region? How do you protect it? Where do you decide it? And what are the key instruments? So in our engagement along these lines, the United Nations has developed a framework called the Integrated National Financing Framework. And the idea is that to see which funding can be unlocked to do what. We know, for instance, that the economic armament for mitigation, for investment in solar energy, reduction of emissions, has more interest from the private sector. So how can we mobilize that investment coming from the private sector? And therefore, we should talk to donors and to philanthropies to invest more in adaptation because we have other funding resources that we can unlock for mitigation. And when we touch on the governance issue, we see that private sector funding tends to focus on countries which have better credit rating, more socioeconomic stability, and more certainty in terms of the political governance systems. So you know in 5-10 years, your partners will still be there, and you will still have some kind of a framework to work with them on multi-year mechanisms. So the whole point behind the Integrated National Financing Framework is to help you see the same reason why a consumer would not buy a car on their credit card is the same reason why we need to look at the different financing instruments. So we can unlock this funding from the private sector, that funding from there. And if we see, for instance, a lot of value in the real estate sector, which can help a government in country X unlock a lot of resources, but requires some regulatory frameworks and some adjustments in order to create financing guarantees or other financing schemes or insurance mechanisms or cost sharing or first burden or all sorts of innovations. So that's what we're doing in multiple countries. We've had some success in countries like Vietnam, and Nigeria, Azerbaijan, Malaysia, and a number of other countries as well, including our region, Jordan, Egypt, and others as well. And I want to say that it's helping us address part of the problem, but at the end of the day, it's a national decision to be made in terms of what do you want to pursue, and also in terms of how do we work with the international community. Today is Finance Day at COP. I hope that through our engagements here, we will have a little bit more attention given to the different instruments and making sure there is more bold action and more willingness to take risks to invest in this. Otherwise, we'll have more repeated losses, such as the situation in Pakistan and elsewhere.
Yeah. Perfect.
So I know I haven't answered your question,
yes,
but given you more questions, but at least there's some work going on behind the background.
Mustafa, before we move to you, I can see you would like to react quickly.
I just wanted to jump in because I thought this is a really important point that you're making. And I wanted to share with you something which I found was a very optimistic sign under the form of the last green bond issue done by the Public Institutional Fund of Saudi Arabia. And just to share with you some interesting facts about that. That was a bond issued last October, so just a month ago. And it had tranches going up to 100 years. But the very interesting fact, and I think is important element to understand in how we channel finance to the region as well, is that only 10% of the buyers of the bonds were actually allocated to GCC investors. So 90% was invested by investors based outside of the GCC, which is a very strong sign of confidence by the international community on the ESG credentials. And over half of this allocation, and 64% of the 100-year tranche was to asset managers. And on top of that, as that bond was not registered S for US investors, it means that the majority of it was done outside of the US, so in Europe and Asia. So why I'm saying that as an illustration, it's because attracting investments to the region, especially when it's green, means that you have to attract investors who are mostly in Europe extremely keen on looking at the climate elements and the ESG transition. So it's really a super optimistic sign that that could be done on this emission at a time where the markets were very difficult, because the bond market has been almost shut for a part of this year because of the current situation. So I'm just saying this is an optimistic sign, but also a lesson that you can attract in the region international funds to develop the projects around the energy transition and ESG, even with foreign investors, if you are credible, which is really the case when you have strong leadership signs and plans like the Vision 2030, the commitments of the various countries, but also that you start to demonstrate that you're capable of delivering on those projects. I'll stop here.
Thank you.
Can I
Thank
add
you.
something to that, although I'm taking from your time?
No, go
Yes.
ahead, Ryan.
Very quickly, one of the key outcomes from last year's COP26 is the GFANZ, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. That has unlocked $130 trillion in terms of assets and resources that's looking for those kind of opportunities. Our role in the United Nations is to work with countries around the world to make sure that the regulatory environment, the framework, the instruments to attract and do that kind of work are in place and are capable of delivering on that. Just wanted to add on.
Okay. Thank you, Raidan. Mustafa, to follow up what was mentioned before, one of these other mechanisms that we also hear about is debt for climate swaps. This can be a useful complement to existing climate finance instruments. With these swaps, the debt obligations are reduced of certain countries. That the country commits to financial contributions in the country on climate. Now, could you tell us a bit more how this works in practice? And what's in it for developed countries? So what's in it for developed country who's actually agreeing on reducing the debt of the country?
Thank you very much, Sepa. So regarding the debt for climate swaps, very quickly, it's a financial instrument that reduces a country's debt in exchange for commitments and investments and climate action. And why I want to focus on this, and I'm coming from the research perspective and then the academic perspective. So in the region generally suffers from public debt, but after COVID, the public debt has grown to around 60% of the region's GDP, and the numbers are still going up. We'll see what happens after this year as well. So it's quite a big issue, debt for the region. To the extent that the World Bank chief economist said a week ago that for the bank, it's climate change and debt. Those are two things that they have to focus on right now. And I was actually in a session the other day, and Dr. Muhyiddin, who's the UN high-level climate champion for Egypt, and he said the optimal scenario for climate finance is to deliver on the 100 billion and then the new goal as well. The second best option, in his opinion, is debt for climate swaps, because it is a win-win. You sort of fix the debt issue that developing countries are now suffering from, but you also get climate action, okay? And one of the reasons it's a very important instrument, so we have the UNFCCC needs-based climate finance assessment, and when they looked at Arab countries, for example, the Arab countries put out 450 billion US dollars up to 2030 in order to develop on their, deliver on their NDCs. What they're getting right now is somewhere around 6. So we have to go from 6 to 450 billion. That's quite a big leap. And so we have to think of new ways on how we can deliver that, because what we're seeing right now is the 100 billion has not been delivered, right? And all the new numbers that are coming up are in the trillions. So we cannot wait for the finance to be delivered anymore. We have to think of ways that will work right now. That said, the region, not a single country in the region has actually gone for climate swaps, debt for climate swaps yet. But they have experience in development swaps, so they can build on this experience, and they can also learn from other countries. So we're seeing Seychelles, for example, is going for debt for climate swaps, the Belize, the Bahamas. So there are positive examples that are coming up right now. Yeah, I think I'll stop here, and yeah, I'm happy to.
Thank you, Mustafa. Now, for our next question, and for sure I'll give then the chance for the audience to ask questions as well. We have this big title, Climate Finance in the Middle East, Gaps and Opportunities. So I want to actually ask you, let's skip the gaps, let's immediately go to the opportunities. So what are the opportunities for the Middle East for climate finance? And I ask a question then from a banking, from a manufacturer, UN, and a research perspective. Ivano, let's start with you.
Well, from a manufacturing point of view, and again, I'll use Emirates Global Aluminium as an example, it's all about partnerships. So we can do things in silo, but the greatest creativity comes when different perspectives are taken into account. And again, we're looking now at projects with the manufacturers to retrofit our gas turbines to run on 100% hydrogen, as an example, to achieve the maximum level of decarbonization of the power, specific to clients' requirement. But also we have the product on the market, which is Celestial, which is aluminum made with renewable power. Considering that aluminum is energy intensive, it makes the best approach and it gets a lot of market demand as well. And just to say on top of this is the quick wins. So it's not a matter of us pursuing a short-term trajectory, but rather trying to continue developing and partnering with different entities, with different industry bodies to identify exactly when technology matures and how much is needed. And just recently, the Mission Possible partnership, together with the International Aluminum Institute, released a report to show the pathway and exactly how much capital is needed to achieve those by the different decades.
Okay, thank you. Mustafa, from a research perspective?
Well, I'll go back to the debt for climate swaps, but I'll argue even further. I think in the region we should go for debt for adaptation swaps specifically, because mitigation is still attracting finance. Our issue is going to be with adaptation. It's not receiving enough funding. The impacts are happening right now. We're seeing them happening. So we cannot wait anymore for the finance to be delivered. And actually, I want to touch upon something that you mentioned before. What do the donors actually get out of that? The idea is there's a looming recession that might hit developed countries. We have developing countries that are very much in debt, and they will probably not be able to pay their debts. So why not we actually relieve them from the debt in exchange for action, which they are willing to do. The countries want to take action. So let's give them this opportunity. Let's not increase the burden of debt on them. Let's give them the opportunity to actually take action. That said, I'm not saying they shouldn't go for finance and attracting finance, and also for finance. I'm all for finance flows from the developed to the developing countries. But I'm saying we're in a crucial time where we have to think out of the box. We have to utilize all the tools that we have. So I would also add that we have a lot of opportunities when it comes to green bonds, for example, as Amin mentioned before. We have to mobilize the sovereign wealth funds in the region. But for me, climate for adaptation or climate for conservation debt swaps are a huge opportunity. The director of the Nature Conservancy the other day said that when it comes to the potential for debt for climate swaps, they think that they can conserve an area the size of the USA Just from investing in conservation in oceans, right? In the swaps for ocean conservation, then that's huge. So it has the potential, and we should really capitalize on that.
Thank you. Ryan, do you agree?
I can't not agree, not disagree. Sorry. In terms of opportunities, I think there are 4 key opportunities. The first one is that this region is an energy powerhouse. So with all that power in terms of fossil fuels, but also in terms of clean energy, you can invest in powering the growth of this region for centuries to come. So I think the leadership that we're seeing here in terms of investing in the announcement that we've heard about new wind farms, solar investments, and all sorts of areas allows you to fuel the growth of this region in a big way and have clean energy, especially in energy-intensive sectors such as the aluminium. So that gives it a region a huge boost to secure its financial future for the foreseeable future. The second issue is in relation to the opportunities in adaptation. We have been ahead of the curve in terms of the hits of the climate action. I was having a conversation with colleagues from the Sultanate of Oman last year in terms of early warning systems and different measures that were taking place. And some of the learnings that they have built along the lines. We see more intense, more frequent natural disasters, but we're also building the systems and the capabilities in terms of radar, in terms of early warning systems, in terms of foresight, so that we know how to deal with this kind of situation. So when the temperature hits 40 and 50 degrees, we don't panic, and unlike other parts of the world, but we also have some kind of capabilities and the foresight in order to be able to deal and adapt with that sort of future. And that will help in mitigating the natural crisis. And if I can just add one point to that, earlier this year there was a lot of torrential rains happening in the UAE, but we had 0 fatalities, which is an achievement in a big way, despite some economic losses. It's because of the infrastructure that's capable, that's climate ready, and that's able to invest in that direction. So I think the second opportunity is investing in the infrastructure and the capabilities for adaptation that helps us prevent future losses. The third one is working with the private sector in this region, working with the financiers. This is a rich region. There is a lot of opportunity. Some economists, and I'm an economist myself, but we don't always believe our own forecasts, say that we're looking at the lost decade in a sense, and looking at the impact of the current crisis. So we do have some investment opportunities in infrastructure and other related areas, utilizing the resources that we currently have. In the last Arab Summit in Algeria, there was a discussion in terms of the economic collective clout of the region and how can we work together as countries of the region, how can we work with different parts of the region in order to invest in our future and make sure that we have a double-digit economic growth and economic returns of that. And the fourth opportunity is not exactly financial, but I would say it's demographic. And I know there was a lot of attention coming, especially tomorrow during the Youth Day, looking at the population dynamics that we have. We are blessed to have a young population in the region, and I think that will help us generate future jobs, generate future productivity, and secure a sustainable economic growth over the future. And just to add one last point on that is that we're looking to build economies that are sustainable, relying on sustainable and net zero and green economic cycles, transitioning away from our current dependence on fossil fuels. And I think the next generations will be able to take us forward in a big way on that. So
thank you, Ryan. I mean, some other opportunities to add?
Yeah, so look, I think you summarized it perfectly. For us as a private financial institution, I think we cannot solve all the problems. You know, there are a lot of things that have to be done at the public sector levels, and you know, like debt management, etc., are outside of our scope. But we still see massive opportunities, especially, I would say, focusing purely on the private, where on the private sector we can act a bit more alone without the help of the public policies, which I think are much more needed in Africa. But if I look at the Gulf region, we have economies that are effectively able to finance their transformation. They have, with their vision, understood that they have to decarbonize, to start to decarbonize and to diversify their industries. And that creates, that's combined with the current high level of energy, which is helping them finance this, that's combined a perfect opportunity to finance this transformation. And on that, we can actually be the intermediaries which are channeling the international capital to the region, for instance. Now, we are speaking of opportunities, but I think we have to also speak of some risks. And when I speak of that channeling of capital, we have to be very careful to do this in a very serious manner. One of the big risks that we are facing now is greenwashing. And it's a little bit of a hype thing to speak of green, and sometimes we face situations where people would like to label green just because it looks good. That's not the way it works. And we have to educate as well our clients, our partners, so that they understand that this is quite demanding and commitments have to be delivered with verifications, with real outputs, real KPIs, and it's not simply a nice title to put on top of financing. But when we achieve that, and we do achieve that, we have great successes. And I think we have plenty coming in the future 5 years.
Thank you. I mean, it's now time for the audience to ask the questions. Please make sure you introduce yourself and also well to who you would address the question. It can also to all panelists. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello. Yeah. Hi. So I'm a lawyer. My name is Joyvin. I'm a partner with a law firm called DLA Piper. So my practice is capital markets, and one of the slides that you showed showed the investments in various SDGs. One of the SDGs which has got the least investment is the blue economy, the life below water, which is SDG 14. So I mean, one of the things, I came from the Ocean Pavilion just from this morning. One of the investments that is most lacking is in the blue economy and into the blue finance, because the ocean is a 3 trillion economy, and I think the Middle East is also going to have to address the issues with climate change as far as the oceans are concerned. Now, where are the opportunities for blue finance in the Middle East, and how can instruments such as blue bonds be adapted and adopted in the Middle East?
Thank you.
I can.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I mean, one example that we have done is indirectly, but for instance, shipping. The shipping industry is one of the big emitters of either pollution or emissions. So, and that's a big industry on which we can actually have an impact. So one example is, I think 2021 we helped Maersk through a green bond issuance to finance the conversion of some ships to green methanol. So that's the kind of things that we're pushing. It's on the shipping industry more directly to help the transition to cleaner vessels.
And if I may add as well, I think specific to the blue economy, it's just a matter of time, because now we have all entities committing to decarbonization within the 2050 real time frame. But if you sum up all the emissions, we do not have enough trees on land. This is putting things into perspectives. It's not like there isn't investment in the blue economy. It's just not mapped enough, or is not of the scale that it's required. But moving forward, we will see more corporate, private investments in this specific field, just like in the good old CDM days. So forward-thinking origination projects which generate the additional nature-based removals.
Maybe I can add something on that. Money is smart. They tend to go where the SDGs are more promising and more economically viable. Bunker fuels, which are fuels coming from emissions, are not covered under any country-specific emissions, because often they happen on the open seas. So that's a gap in the UNFCCC framework. Hopefully, it will be addressed through the World Maritime Organization, but that's a different conversation. So in that kind of context, what is the incentive to invest in that if it's not really captured, if you're not going to pay for it? You pollute, you don't pay, so it doesn't really matter. There are some initiatives, like Maersk, like other shipping companies, airlines, and other partners, but the incentive is not really there. So I think we have a structural governance issue on that. There are multiple countries which have some initiatives. For example, the UAE looks at the blue transformation from a food security perspective in terms of how can we capitalize on maritime access to build more resilience in terms of fish farming and other related initiatives and so on. But we see these initiatives and they're not capital intensive as much as the other SDGs. So don't let the figures fool you. And on that note, the graph that I presented is in terms of funding that's channeled through the UN system. There is funding channeled outside the United Nations system to go into that. I invite you to visit the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Pavilion, which has actually on the 14th dedicated attention to that particular element on Monday. You will find some answers, I hope.
Yeah. Just very quickly adding just a point. I think your question is really on point. We tend to forget about the impact that we're having on the oceans. One of the really, when I see this number, I get quite scared. If we reach 2 degrees of warming, we will lose almost all coral reefs globally, right? So that's an area that we tend to forget about, but it's very, very important. So I think there is a lot of room in terms of investing in oceans and in ocean conservation. And that said, and I'm saying why I'm saying you're on point. So for us at the Anwar Gargash Diplomatic Academy, the first thing I'm doing when we get back, I'm working with a colleague. So we're having a workshop, bringing in policymakers, private sector, think tanks to actually discuss how can we push forward blue economy. And my colleague is calling it blue is the new green. We have to think in that direction, right? So yeah, that's my two.
Thank you, Mustafa, and thank you for referring to coral reefs being in Sharm el Sheikh. So thank you for that one. We still have time for one more question, but let's take the boat questions.
Hi, my name is Rawa. I guess this would be to UN and research, but whoever. Now that loss and damages is the hot topic and had gained like an official spot on the governance agendas, I'm wondering what does that mean and how would that translate if it ends up happening for MENA countries? And for the UN, how does that look like in terms of monitoring how this money is going to be spent in case some countries end up getting some remuneration for loss and damages? Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, welcome to COP.
Sorry, then let's take the second question and also one question. Let's take all three and then we will answer them, yeah? Sorry.
Hi, my name is Ganesh Kumar. I have a question towards the risk side we mentioned. You spoke about one of this is greenwashing, right? So how do you avoid greenwashing in financial institutions? What are the best practices you follow to avoid this greenwashing?
Yeah. We have one more question there.
Yeah, Salman Abdullah from AGDA. Just one question. How does the financing world perceive the difference between carbon utilization versus storage, given that the storage is just kicking the can into the future?
Thank you. We still have 3 minutes, so I'm going to ask you to be very short. So let's start with the loss and damage question, the first question.
Okay. So that's an item under negotiation at this point in time. There has been multiple previous commitments on the Santiago Network, for example, which is an instrument for capacity development. But the key premise is that we're looking for justice. Some countries, Annex 1 countries of the agreement, have been polluting for quite some time, and that's causing, scientifically proven, a lot of the damages that we're experiencing. So there is a justice element into it, and that will be refined following the negotiations. Some countries, Denmark, Scotland, have made some commitments on that front, and there is an idea of establishing a facility or a fund that is going to compensate some countries. And some countries have some visions. The president, and we were speaking about this earlier, of the leader of Vanuatu, mentioned yesterday that there should be some kind of mechanism to make sure that the highest emitters, including some extractive industry companies, oil companies, should pay into such a facility because they're the ones creating a lot of this initiative. But there is a bit of push and pull. But I suspect with a bit of time, with a bit of progress, it will come there. It's a question of justice, and it has to be realized. I don't have an answer, sorry.
And Mustafa, what does it mean for the MENA region?
Yeah, I'll echo Raidan on that. I think it's too early to tell. It's a one step forward to have loss and damage on the agenda, but it's very early to tell whether this could result in a finance mechanism actually or not. It could be a dialogue, but yeah, it's too early to tell. But the good sign is we're seeing bilaterals in terms of loss and damage. I think that's quite good. So we saw Scotland, Denmark, among others, Belgium as well. So it is moving forward.
Good. Then we had a question on greenwashing. Who want to take that one?
Yeah, yesterday actually yesterday the United Nations and led by Minister McKenna of Canada, the guidelines in terms of greenwashing and how to avoid greenwashing and how can we make sure that there is some kind of seriousness in terms of our commitments. Are they real? Are we actually going to net zero? Are we talking about scope 1 emissions, scope 2, scope 3, and so on? So I think that announcement and the report that come from that high-level technical committee provides some clear guidelines in terms of what is actually genuine work on climate action and what's greenwashing, which should be actually pushed to become more real, if that helps.
If I may just add to that, just from an industry perspective, we work collaboratively with industry associations because obviously there is a lot of misunderstanding in the market as we stand, and things are so new, changing almost every day. So we cannot just be in a standalone silo, but working collaboratively mitigates the risk of greenwashing and actually opens up more opportunities.
Thank you.
And I can add.
Yeah, of course. And if you can also answer the question on the financial institutions.
On the greenwashing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what we do every day. Essentially, we have to embed it in our governance. Our commercial teams. We have commercial teams that are selling this service to issuers, for instance. They have to strike the right balance between willing to please their clients and do whatever is asked in a competitive environment where you could have other banks offering to do it. And actually, that's why I was speaking of education, because we need to educate the clients so that they see it's for their own good, not to push the envelope too far, and also educate our own staff on what exactly is green. So there is a massive effort, I can say for BNP Paribas, I'm sure in other banks as well. There is a massive effort of education because, as you said, it's a very evolving and things change every day. A massive effort to educate our staff, but also to make sure that they educate the clients so that we don't succumb to the commercial pressure. And sometimes it's difficult when you're a commercial person and you have a client who tells you, yeah, but my other bank is saying I should do that. Why don't you think so? And you have to say, no, it's not green enough. But that's what we do day in, day out.
Thank you. As we're already in overtime and the next session will start in a few minutes, we have to wrap up there, but I'm sure the panelists will still be around to take some more questions if you want. Thank you all for this interesting discussion, and thank you to the audience to stay here. Thank you.